everyone, and welcome to the ASMR review show. This is a video that I've wanted to make for some time, and now I finally am able to. And that is, I'm going to be showcasing all of the albums by the band Death. Finally managed to collect them all on vinyl, so we're going to talk about them. Death is obviously a death metal band. There's some debate as to whether they were the first. Some like to cite the album Seven Churches by the band Possessed as being the first true death metal album. But regardless of who came first, Death is one of the biggest and one of the best. I wouldn't even consider myself that big of a fan of specifically the death metal genre, but something about the way these guys managed to do it is just amazing. So, this is the first Death album, Scream Bloody Gore, released in 1987. Some lovely album artwork here. And on the back, track listing. So, first Death album was very straightforward, very short songs, very fast and punchy, like a much more aggressive thrash metal. And the lyrical focus was on, the blood and guts and gore and the zombie imagery, like the song Evil Dead, baptized in blood, mutilation, denial of life. That was the focus. It was this like shockingness to it, and it's pretty awesome. With all these reissues, they've come with a lovely lyrical insert and some artwork and photos of the band. So the main member of Death, who was sort of the main leader, the brains behind the operation, was Chuck Schuldiner. I used to think it was pronounced Chuck Schuldiner, but I've seen former band members in interviews refer to him as Chuck Schuldiner, so that is how I will be saying it. So, most Death albums had a lineup that changed on each album, with Chuck being the one consistent. And on this album, he actually did vocals, guitar, and bass. The only other member on the studio album besides him was Chris Riefert, I believe is how you say his name, and he was on drums. And nice thing about this as well is this insert has little essays and paragraphs written by former members about their experience of either recording the album or being involved with Chuck during the recording of the album. So it's interesting because, well, first of all, I will say I've talked a lot about this one already on a couple of my previous videos. Death is one of my favorite bands, and I've always wanted to do a video just purely dedicated to Death and their music, and now I'm finally able to. And as I've previously said, Death for me was a band that I think improved with every album. So, while Scream Bloody Gore may be the one I love the least, it's still amazing. Death is a band with 7 albums, and they're all masterpieces. For some, picking a favorite Death album it's like picking a favorite child, just how do you do it? So, like I say, maybe my least loved, but this album still packs quite a nice simple punch, and it's a great piece of classic death metal history. Next up, we have Death's second album, released in 1988. This is Leprosy, which I know is a fan favorite for some who prefer Death's older style to their newer style. Once again, some lovely imagery on the artwork here. The album's called Leprosy. I'd say that the artwork really represents that. And on the back we have some more of a conceptual art version of that. So this actually is the double album version. I couldn't find the single disc version, so I just decided, well, hey, I could find the double album version, I may as well get it. There's not much on the second vinyl. It's just a couple of rehearsals, demos, and then I don't know if there's live recordings here. No, it's all just basically demo recordings. So, you know, if you're really into that sort of stuff, it's cool to hear it, but I'm here for the main album itself. This one, I feel, is definitely a step up from Scream Bloody Gore. There's the title track, Leprosy, great way to open the album, and such great songs like Choke on It and Left to Die, but the highlight for me, and probably the fan favorite as well on this, is the song Pull the Plug, which is just about not wanting to suffer and just pull the plug on life, end it all. It's got a great chorus, a lot of energy to it. So I do really like this album a lot. This one is more of the gatefold because it's a double record. And the lineup for this, we had Chuck, of course, on guitar and vocals. But this time he was joined by Bill Andrews on drums, Terry Butler on bass, and Rick Ross on guitar as well. So there's more essays here from other members and producers, and it's got little lyrics here for you as well, which is pretty nice. So I really like what they did with the art for all of this. They, you know, it wasn't just simply remastering the albums or reissuing it, just simply they went out of their way to include lyrics and notes and all that stuff. And as someone who likes records and likes all those little details, it's nice to have those all together with the album here. So this is another really great album as well, kind of evolving on the sound of Scream Bloody Gore. It's a little more complex, but it's still the punchy, brutal death metal with the gore and all that, you know, all that stuff. It's just One thing I realized I cannot forget to show. I hadn't shown you the actual record because they're really just, you know, the usual black record, nothing special. You've all seen a record before, I'm assuming. But what's cool about this copy of Leprosy is it's on clear vinyl. Ooh, look, it's so shiny and colorful. It's not colorful. It's so shiny and pretty. Alright, yeah. Clear vinyl's cool, right? Figured y'all just might appreciate that. It's always the most difficult part. Next album by Death, one that you can see that I'm quite the fan of, and that is Spiritual Healing. was released in, was it 1989, I believe? I'm sure it'll say on the inside just to confirm. I believe it was 89, or was it 90? Don't worry, I will correct it once I look at the liner notes more. But so yeah, this is Spiritual Healing. This album cover obviously is sort of a jab at faith healers. You see here there's this priest who claims to be, letting the power flow through him to heal this person. But as we see here, he's got like some kind of necklace that has a $sign on it. He's got a nice gold chain in his pocket, and he's got money in the other one. Meanwhile, this lady here looks like she's holding a knife, but it's actually a Bible with this badge saying, "I found it." Yeah, so it's sort of a socio-political religious commentary, and that was kind of the theme for this album. Musically, again, it's an evolution of the sound from Leprosy, more complex and diverse. Some of the songs are getting to be a little longer, like the title track, Spiritual Healing, that's at least over 7 minutes, which is a bit longer than the average Death song at this point. And then lyrically, Death was moving away from the blood and guts type imagery of the first two albums, and we're getting more towards the political and the social and the more real world issues. Altering the Future is about abortion, and Killing Spree is about how killers can seem like normal people to us 1 second and then monsters the next. Genetic Reconstruction is like about, I think, like eugenics, and then Living Monstrosity is about like being born into the life of a cocaine addict. So a lot of really, really relaxing, peaceful stuff to talk about. Once again, more lovely photos of the band in the era. So, for this one, the lineup was slightly different. Terry Butler remained on bass, and we had Bill Andrews on drums, but James Murphy took over on guitar instead. I also like how, in addition to all the essays and paragraphs and the lyrics, this also denotes who it is playing each guitar solo, so that's kind of nice. I always assumed that my favorite solos on the album were by Chuck, but James Murphy has a few really good ones in here and there, so credit to him for that. And let me just confirm what year it was. I believe it was... No, it was 1990, so would you look at that? I was mistaken. I guess it makes sense. They toured for a while in 89, recorded it late 89 then, and then got it released in early 1990. That makes sense. But I'm gonna check the internet just to be sure, because I sometimes have my doubts about these things. Yes, it is 1990. Okay. Better safe than sorry. I would hate to be corrected in a video. I'm sure I've never done that before. But the main point is that Spiritual Healing, fantastic album. More of a focus on something a little more significant to us than just simply zombies and stuff. And definitely more brutal. Next album is one I talked about a a long time ago in another video when I first got it on vinyl. And this is Human, released in 1991. And it's a funny story about this. So when I was a young larva form of a metalhead and rock snob, in my quest to find all the great classic albums, I saw Human recommended as a great metal album, and I listened to it, and I hated it because it had harsh vocals, and my main complaint was, well, I can't understand what the guy's saying, so what does it matter? So I put off listening to Human for a while, and then there was another Death album that somehow clicked, and I got into that, and then I stayed on that one album for the longest time, thinking that was the only thing I liked. I'll talk more about that when I get to talking about that album. But all of a sudden, every other Death album clicked for me, like, at the same time, and Human clicked, and it is one of my favorites by them. So I think I've said this before if you saw my other video where I talked about this album, but I'll say it again here because not everybody has. But basically, this album is incredibly complex and tightly orchestrated, and there's so many difficult drum parts and these blistering guitar solos, but also it's a very simple album because it's very short. Like, if you don't include the cover of Kiss's God of Thunder, which is the bonus track, there's only 8 songs. They're all very short too. Most of them only in the 3 to 4 minute range, so it's about average song length. And they have a very simple structure. Most, if not all, Death songs follow a simple structure of having an intro, a verse, and a chorus. But then instead of doing a second verse, they skip straight to the guitar solos. Then there's the second verse, the second chorus, and then the song ends. So it's interesting because normally in your standard song progression you have 2 verses and 2 choruses before your bridge and your solo. Then you have potentially a 3rd verse and a 3rd chorus to end on. But in most of Death's songs they eliminated that second verse. That repetition went straight to the solo, and then did the second verse and second chorus as being the final one. So, it keeps the song length down because there's less repetition, and it feels like there's more forward progression in the song. And it's always cool to see how the solo riffs manage to perfectly link back into the intro riff to the song or the verse riff without it feeling forced. It's very technically proficient in that way. And, you know, I have favorite songs on Scream Bloody Gore and Leprosy and Spiritual Healing. But when it comes to Human, I love pretty much every song on this album. Flattening of Emotions, Suicide Machine, Together as One, Secret Face, Lack of Comprehension, See-Through Dreams, Cosmic Sea, which is a really cool instrumental, and Vacant Planets. Even the cover of Kiss, God of Thunder, it seems very out of left field for Death to cover a Kiss song, but they really make it work. Fun fact about Together as One. Anytime I'm like at like the supermarket or something like that, and or if I just happen to notice like 2 strawberries or 2 limes that have like fused together or like grown together, you ever get that? I just sort of silently am singing in my head, together they absorb each other's thoughts as one. They will live and they will die. A living hell has begun. So, as I said it before, you know, it's like, I love death. Like, death makes me happy. Death makes me smile. That is their music, not the, physiological concept of life leaving the body. So, once again, more production notes, although this is cool. Got some photographs of handwritten lyrics from Chuck. So, this album had a completely different lineup this time. Is, of course, Chuck, always on guitar and vocals. But you had Paul Masvidal on guitar, Sean Reinhardt on drums, and the amazing Steve DiGiorgio on bass. We'll talk about his work as a bass player in metal more later. His bass playing on this album is great, but this is him basically getting warmed up for some later moments. So, I also just love, like, the production on this album. It, like, everything feels kind of small, like a tiny drum set and everything like that. There's something about the sound that feels small, but you put on a good pair of headphones or, like, a good speaker system, it just feels massive and just so punchy. Like, and that's how it should be, right? So, yeah, really fantastic album. If you can't seem to get into Death, this might be a good place to start. That's what most people say. Like I said, this was not the one that clicked for me, but for most people it might. I think some would say this is their best album because this was before they got into the really crazy technical extreme stuff. But it still had a bit of that old school sound, so, it was in the middle of their discography, and it was a nice blend of all things Death. Next album that we come to in the Death discography, released in 1993, is Individual Thought Patterns. Yeah, love the artwork for this one as well. You may have noticed that the Death logo was changed slowly over time. The original logo, you may have noticed, or of course you can kind of see it on my shirt. It's very, had a lot of detail to it. And slowly, I guess they just decided to strip the logo down until it was a little more simple and straightforward. So here you can see that there's not all the cobwebs and the spider webs and the dripping blood from the scythe. There's still the inverted cross as the T, the skull over the H, and the scythe. But you'll see once we get later on, it's almost completely stripped down. So this album, I felt, is basically like Human Part 2. A lot of short songs, simplistic structure, but very technically proficient. And the drum sound is similar, even though it's a different drummer. The standout highlight for me on this record, though, is Steve DiGiorgio's bass playing, because he uses a fretless bass for this. And he plays lots of really weird, jazzy sounding bass lines that you wouldn't think would be at home on a death metal record. But it just is such a unique sound that it just really captivates me. So, this also has a lot of my favorite songs, like Trapped in a Corner, Mentally Blind, Destiny, and I know that the closing track, The Philosopher, was basically a live staple and a fan favorite. So, I really like this album a lot, but I know that not everyone was the biggest fan of it. I think some people would consider it a step down from Human. I'd kind of place them along the same level, though I do find I listen to Human more. not that this is a bad album, right? This is a fantastic album, but you know, maybe it's the one time where I could say that they didn't necessarily get better with every album. They stayed at the same level. I can say Leprosy is better than Scream Bloody Gore, and Spiritual Healing is better than Leprosy, and Human is better than Spiritual Healing, but I don't know if I could say Individual Thought Patterns is better than Human. It's the one outlier in that statement. More artwork, this time with lots of cool posters advertising the band at their tour, some tickets. Some lovely art here of the band. So this time the lineup for the band, or sorry, the album, Steve DiGiorgio was still on bass, fretless bass. Andy LaRocque was on guitars, and Gene Hoglan was on drums and prop, as in like a boat propeller. He used a boat propeller essentially as like a little ride cymbal, like the, what do you call it, like the top of the ride, the bell part of it. I know in the title track, the first track, Overactive Imagination, you can hear it in the chorus of that song. So, yeah. Gene Hoglan, by the way, fantastic drums on this record. Did an amazing job. So, yeah. Overall, it's another really solid Death album. And I feel it's underrated. I think it gets overlooked probably because of the albums that it is sandwiched in between. Of course, the next one we're going to talk about, you'll see what I mean when we talk about that. So, this next album, I've said that Human is considered to be their best, but I also see many people make the case that their best is their 1995 release, Symbolic. You see here as well the Death logo, once again more simplified. Now the cross, it's no longer an inverted cross, it's simply a symmetrical. It's not a regular cross, it's not inverted, it's just symmetrical, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, this is Symbolic. This is so good. I find it weird though, like, every other album you could find consistent represses of it online from like Roadrunner Records, I believe it is, or Relapse Records. This one's on Roadrunner, every other one is on Relapse, so this one was a lot harder to find, which is weird and unfortunate because it's one of the best Death albums. Like, you look at this track list and this is basically a greatest hits album. You got Symbolic, Zero Tolerance, Empty Words, Sacred Serenity, 1,000 Eyes, Without Judgment, which has one of the coolest guitar interludes in a song, Crystal Mountain, probably the most accessible Death track, Misanthrope, and Perennial Quest, which is a 8.5-minute epic that ends on actually a very emotional note. You wouldn't think that death metal could give you the feels, but this album proves you can have feels and metal and all of it together. I'll show you the record for this one because this one's pretty cool. Pressed on white vinyl. Yeah. Kind of a nice contrast to the whole dark and grim color scheme you don't really see in metal. It's nice and bright and white. Though not as cooler as the Sunbather record where you had like a translucent green and a pink. I feel I shouldn't have to give the disclaimer that I have one of my dogs on the bed right here out of frame, not that they're sleeping. It's just a thing I do in every video now. But, you know, here's your warning for that. If I can't make anyone else fall asleep ranting about death metal, then at least one of my dogs can enjoy it. That's all I ask for. And this one doesn't have as much sort of put into like the notes and the lyrics, because again, I think this is the only one that doesn't have a Relapse reissue, and this is just a Roadrunner reissue. So, lineup on this one, we no longer had Steve DeGorgio on bass. Instead, we had Kelly Conlon, and on guitar we had Bobby Colbill. Not bad at names, except. But we still had Gene Hoglan on drums, and he still used a propeller from a boat as part of the bell of a ride cymbal. It's a pretty interesting way to do things. I haven't talked about lyrical concepts in a while, but on Human, Chuck had sort of, I think, found his calling of what to talk about. It was all about death and philosophy and psychology and just a lot of human concepts. And then basically that sort of conceptually was the basis for Death's lyrical output for the rest of their career, really. You know, we have songs like Empty Words and A Thousand Eyes is like kind of about government surveillance. Perennial Quest, just about having to take the journey to like find oneself. Yeah, Soul album's fantastic. Like, I could put on any song from this album and I would just be instantly in the zone. It's great, it's fantastic, and I love the guitar tone on it as well. And finally we come to my favorite Death album, the final Death album. The one that feels like the culmination of everything they'd been working towards and evolving towards. And that is The Sound of Perseverance, released in 1998, I believe. Yeah. So, this one, not really a long album, but enough to be a double album because of the length of some songs. He likes to snore. So, this is like Symbolic, an album where I love every song and everyone's fantastic and everything is great. It's just so amazing. Basically, listen to the first 15 seconds of the song Scavenger of Human Sorrow. If that does not get you going and get you pumped, then I don't think Death is the band for you, unfortunately. It's very unfortunate. So, yeah, this is easily the most technical and extreme and diverse and complex Death album. I say it's the final boss, what they were all building to. Just to put out amazing that in favor of this album is the song Spirit Crusher. There's like one riff in the middle of the song that's just a little transition riff, and that one riff basically manages to invent the entire metalcore genre. Listen to that riff and tell me if you don't think of Avenged Sevenfold's Unholy Confessions. It also has Voice of the Soul, which is a really cool instrumental that's actually mostly like an acoustic guitar with an electric solo for that. It's quite a departure from the normal Death sound, and yet still manages to really bring some good music. The album ends with the original song, A Moment of Clarity, which is probably my favorite Death song, and also a cover of Judas Priest's Painkiller. which they sort of switch up the sound of it a bit, but still manage to make it their own and make it interesting. And so then here we have a nice gatefold of the band. There's Chuck, of course, in the middle. And then on guitar we have Shannon Ham, Scott Clendenin on bass, and Richard Christie on drums. This is probably one of the best lineups they had on an album. And also here we have a quote from Nietzsche. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you look long into an abyss, the abyss also looks into you. So, nice quote there, kind of, I think, sums up the mythos behind the album. And then, once again, some lovely photos. Love the look of Chuck there with his BC Rich guitar. Very metal. And then we got more of the lyrics on the inside. And once again telling you all the guitar solos. Stuff like that. Yeah. I just get emotional at the end of A Moment of Clarity, because it's the last original song on the album, and it's the end. Because death has kind of a sad story, unfortunately. That's not the best note to end on, but we will get to that. So, to explain conceptually behind this, I think it's detailed in the essay here. I'll just sort of read from it. But basically, after Death completed the tour for Symbolic, Chuck had wanted to make a new band called Control Denied. And he wanted it to have a different feel from Death. So basically what happened is, let's see here, he had Chris Williams as a drummer, Scott Clendenin, and Paul Payne as a lineup here. And then Shannon Ham, this is who was writing this, had also been invited to be part of this. And then they just needed a singer. They sort of messed around with that for a bit, but they couldn't really figure anything out. But Chuck, he really wanted Tim Amar to be a singer. They realized he was the best. So they recorded some songs as demos, and basically at the time, like the studio and the industry and the fans, they wanted another Death album. So Scott and Chris left, Shannon stayed, Richard Christie joined in, and then Steve DiGiorgio came back to record some demos. Those demos became part of the Sound of Perseverance. But Steve wasn't able to fully commit, so he left, and then Scott came in, and then Scott played on newer demos and the actual album, which is funny because then apparently this ended up being the exact opposite of the next album I'll talk about, where Steve was part of it and then left and then came back, and then Chris was not a part of it. So in a way, this album was supposed to be something that wasn't Death, and then it got reworked into becoming a Death album in the end. And originally, actually, I guess liking this album is controversial, because when I was first getting into Death, the two albums that were recommended were Human and The Sound of Perseverance. I didn't care for Human at the time. Something about the extreme nature of The Sound of Perseverance, I guess probably was the drums, really clicked with me, so I really dug this album. took me a while to get into the rest of Death. I did it eventually. I love everything they do now. But then, years later, I just sort of found a lot of internet talk about this album, and I guess people found it was like too extreme and too out there, and they didn't like the vocals or the style of it, and that they preferred older Death and middle of the road Death like Human. Or that a lot of people all of a sudden agreed Symbolic was their best. As with most people I talked to, like sort of general consensus was, yeah, it's good, it's got some good drums, but it ain't Symbolic. So, I don't know. You can tell me if this being your favorite one is controversial, but I know that it's mine, that's for sure. So, well, The Sound of Perseverance was the final Death album. It was not the final album with Chuck and other of his friends as collaborative members in a group. And this led us to the album he wanted to make before The Sound of Perseverance, which is The Fragile Art of Existence. And this, now the band was called Control Denied, more so to distance themselves from simply being Death and allowing them to take on a bit of a new sound. It's interesting because I've talked to a lot of people who are fans of Death, and not as many of them either know of this album or care for it or have really given it much thought, which I think is a shame, because I'd say this is, like, I love Death's albums, but I'd say this is better than most of their albums, and it's up on par with Symbolic and Sound of Perseverance. Like, I listen to this album non-stop, it's fantastic. It's also got some lovely artwork. So, there's only 8 songs, split across 4 sides, and every one of them is just so detailed and well crafted, and I feel like if Sound of Perseverance was the final album they were building up to, then this essentially is part 2 of it. Because the lineup on this album is also what I feel is the greatest hits of Death. Some nice portraits of all the members right here. So, in addition to Chuck, of course, we had Shannon Hamm on guitar, who was on guitar for Sound of Perseverance. Tim Amar was now doing vocals, and I think his vocals are the biggest point of contention for some people, because he's not doing death metal vocals, he's doing more power metal. It's the closest thing I can think of. I'm not the best with genres. So, yeah, he's got like more of a, like, operatic-y kind of Jack Black sounding voice. I think it's great. I love his style, the way he just belts out lyric and screeches. I think it's really cool. But not everyone's gonna like it. I know a lot of people were complaining that Chuck didn't sing, but that's what it sort of says. It's sort of in the notes here, is that Chuck wanted to have someone else singing so he could focus more on guitar, and I think it's cool that he did that. Then we have Richard Christie on drums, who did drums for Sound of Perseverance. And then we have Steve DiGiorgio back again on bass, previously having played bass on Human and Individual Thought Patterns. And also, like Individual Thought Patterns, he brought back the fretless bass. So we got some pretty sweet fretless bass solos, yeah. If you want to hear how sweet a fretless bass sounds, listen to the intro to the song What If, or the intro to the song Consumed. They both have some pretty great bass leads. So, yeah. Like I say, this album isn't going to appeal to everybody because it's not a Death album. It's basically, if you took the style of Sound of Perseverance, toned it down a little in terms of the heaviness, but made it a little more technical, and then gave it more power metal vocals instead of death metal vocals. I really love it a lot. I talked about it a bit before. I really think y'all should check this album out more, because this in a way is like sort of, if death is the final death album, if death is death, then this is like the message from beyond the grave, and like the final thing Chuck wanted to say to us. Because unfortunately, Control Denied wanted to do a second album called When Man and Machine Collide, but Chuck was diagnosed with brain cancer and unfortunately died from it in 2001. Not the happiest note to end on, I know. And the demos never, unfortunately, came to fruition. They tried to make it happen for a while, but at this point, it's been 20 years, so I don't think it's going to happen. But we have to look on the bright side. We have death. We have their amazing legacy to look back on, and we have all of this wonderful music. So I'm really glad I finally got to make this video for y'all, talk about one of my favorite bands, and I just love everything they've done, you know, just what makes death so awesome. It's death. Anyway, hope y'all enjoyed that, and have a good night.